Small facts, and like if you do that for a while, you'll learn a lot of the more interesting facts about the world. Just in the back of your head, like, oh, I remember that.
So hard to remember.
People are kind of right about something, but not entirely, and you know if you like speak up, you're like, I'll be a snob about it.
Well, we have everybody who didn't present last time here except for Colton. So we'll see if he makes it. I bet he does. Yeah. Our people who presented last time, some are here, some are not. With our miserable weather in this time of the semester and all that stuff. Last time, I did a random number generator to decide what order everybody went in. And our person who is up next, if they're going, is Austin. No, he hates doing these kinds of things.
I usually don't. I just didn't prepare at all.
My phone's going crazy. Okay, so then we're going to go to Seth. He's been stuck in an airport for a few days.
And you guys still haven't had a big presentation.
Now, there is a HDMI cable there to the side.
It just had HDMI. You didn't actually know that.
But so you might be able to use that, or you can.
If you've got these sessions going, that might be the simple way to do it. And then I can just bring my laptop up there for the controls.
Perfect.
Because we like simple. It's weird to think of that as being simpler than just plugging it in. But there it is. So just give me a moment to set up. How was everyone else's weekend while I'm doing this part? Did anyone else get stuck in an airport for 3 days or 2 days?
Oh, I went home with my passport. While I was home, my little brother told his car and fall from the hospital.
It was a yucky weekend.
Yeah, it's kind of boring. Well, like, not good, not good. Boring. Bad.
Boring? That's rude.
I came home for fun, like hang out with friends, get to hang out with my brother. Really not to hang out in the hospital room and.
Yeah, my weekend was basically just computer.
Yeah. Please, can I start this one?
You really want to, you can like, I can put your thing on the flash drive and put it on this computer.
I mean, sure, but it'd probably start the Zoom thing by the time we finished that anyways. I guess alternatively, somebody else could go while I'm trying to get this started.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. We won't tell Miss Riley. Oh, she's right there. Oh, we still won't tell her.
Okay, I don't know.
Give me a second. I always forget how to actually start this. Here we go. Okay. And oh, we actually need it. It's such a lot.
Yep, I've got mine working now. So I guess I can go first after all. Maybe. Here we go. Okay. Okay, I am presenting on a thing called Xamarin that I expect will be a very important tool for all of us, to the point where I kind of wish we could actually devote some class time to it, but I don't think that's going to be a realistic possibility. So what is Xamarin? It is a mobile development framework for developing for iOS, Android, and technically Windows actually has a mobile UI as well, but nobody really uses it, so you don't need to fuss over it so much. It's based off of traditional Xamarin, where originally you had a shared C# backend, and then you had to make a UI for your iOS and a UI for your Android, and you had to make a separate UI for every platform you wanted to run your app on. Xamarin Dot Forms is the newer one that's kind of taking over, based off of traditional Xamarin. And in this case, you still have the shared C# backend, and now you have a shared UI as well. And then if you need to, you can dive into each one and edit it, as you probably will, because they have slightly different rules for things. But generally speaking, you only have to make the UI once, and everything else is handled from there. So this lets you develop on mobile using the familiar C#. You get to use all the .Net Framework tools, and it just gives you a lot more options. You don't necessarily have to go and learn Java or anything like that. It does require a lot of resources. Like, my laptop cannot do it just by itself. I have to try and use my phone too, and even then I'm kind of struggling to make it work. If you're trying to do iOS things, you need to have a Mac. I think Dr. Ford has one, and you don't have to be using it directly. You just need to have it on the network somewhere. Miss Riley sent me a thing on how to connect to it that I can share with the class later if anyone else is interested in that. The way this shared UI is able to work is that when you open a Xamarin project in Visual Studio, you get several different project folders. You have one that has your shared files. So you have mainpage.xaml and mainpage.xaml.cs, which are the two files that you mainly end up working in. And then you have another set that's got your Android stuff, and you don't really need to mess with it unless you need to change something Android specific. And then the same thing with your iOS down here. Unless you have to change something iOS specific, you don't really have to mess in here too often. But they're there on the, in fairness, likely off chance that you do need to mess in there. So the UI itself is based off a thing called XAML, XAML, which stands for Extensible Application Markup Language. It's a little bit like XML, which we're familiar with. Essentially what this is Microsoft has made a bunch of layout bits, and you use this not quite XML file to refer to those. And you can build up your UI a little bit like you would an HTML page, if anyone has taken web dev in here. And this is one of the points where if you're trying to do iOS and Android things, you may have to dive in and edit some things to make it look right, because they do follow slightly different rules. It kind of depends on how much you care about it. Like, it'll usually be little things. Like on one, the text might be a different shade of pink than you wanted. It's nothing huge usually, but it might matter. This XAML file then connects to a CS page like this that might look a little bit familiar. This works a little bit more like the Windows Dot Form page, where you have a partial class and the other part is hidden from us. We don't really need to mess with it. It just makes all the different form pieces we want. And then we can declare different functions here to get our code to run. What I've got circled here and what I had circled before is what this app that I wrote when I was trying to test it is very simple. It just declares an integer called count. And whenever a certain button is clicked, it increments it a bit and then updates a label to show what the current value is. So it really does work pretty similar to the Windows Dot Forms stuff on this end of it. The main difference is that you don't get the little graphical interface to design it with. You have to use the XAML markup to design your UI. Debugging it, however, is quite a bit more of a process. If you've got a really powerful computer, Visual Studio does have a function where you can start up what's called a virtual machine, where it will basically try and simulate an entire phone on your computer and then run the app on it. My laptop cannot handle this. I don't know if any of the OTC computers can handle it. You really do need to have a pretty high-end machine to be able to do this at all efficiently. It's possible, however, to plug your phone into it, and you can test it on your phone instead. And how exactly you go about doing that is going to depend on what kind of phone you've got, and also what kind of computer you're developing on. So the first thing you need to do is, on my phone, what I had to do was I had to go into the About Phone settings and tap a particular button about 1,000,000 times to activate developer mode. And then under the developer mode options, I was able to enable USB debugging. Then, on your computer, you may have to install a device driver to get it to acknowledge that your phone is a phone and not just another flash drive or whatever. If you're running on a Mac, you don't have to worry about that. You can just plug it in and it'll do all that for you. On Windows, you're going to have to look up the procedure depending on which OS you're running. So like there's a different process for Windows 7 and a different process for Windows 8 and a different process for Windows 10. And some of them are a little harder or more finicky than others. Once you've got that done, all you need to do from there is ensure that Visual Studio has acknowledged that you've got your phone plugged in, and that's where it's going to release it when you tell it to debug the program. And that's the part where I've gotten a bit stuck. This part of the process is a lot more involved than I initially thought, and I wasn't able to get it all figured out in the amount of time that I had. But it is definitely there. It's just, if you guys are interested in doing this, you're probably going to have to do a little bit of work on your own on this. Sorry. That is all I have to say about it. Does anybody have any questions on this?
When you're developing the UI, it's kind of like in one phone, you're not going to drag the label in there. You got to like run it to see how to actually do it.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if somebody has made something similar to the form designer, but it is not the standard. Generally, you're going to design it a little bit like you would an HTML page. It does have some somewhat different rules, but a lot of the same kind of premises are there. I believe it's even possible to attach a CSS sheet to style things with, but I'm not perfectly clear on how that works yet.
And that's what Patrick was using in the mobile app development class. But I think there's on the schedule for next week.
There actually is a class on that. That is good to know
It's an
about.
entire class, so yeah, we won't touch on it because it's helpful for my system.
I would definitely recommend taking that class because this is a really powerful capability to have as a developer. Say what?
I think it's hybrid, so I do think it's just important, but it's not on your day.
It's not on my day.
Oh, darn. Yeah, if you take it, be aware, like Seth is talking about, the hardware requirements are quite extreme, and it can be frustrating trying to get things to work together. So using the computers in the lab usually, can still work hard with IT to get those computers working, hopefully. But yes, technical difficulties abound.
If you need an excuse to spend your student aid money on a really high-end computer, this is definitely
There you go.
because you do need a really amazing machine to do it at all efficiently. My computer can't do it without plugging into my phone, and even then, it's been really frustrating trying to get it to work together. It may not work at all because my laptop is kind of old and junky, if I'm being honest. And then even then, if you want to test iOS things, you have to be using a Mac. You don't have to be on the Mac. You just have to have it on the network somewhere, but realistically being on the Mac probably makes it a lot more straightforward. That said, it is all definitely very important because mobile apps are a huge thing in the industry right now and probably will continue to be for some time.
Thank you. Yay. Great info. Okay. Now, according to my list, no. Okay. Need a second here.
So my presentation is well, I guess it's more theory than, well, not theory. It's more of trying to figure out what C# is actually good for. You know, all of us know how to program in C#. We know what it can and some of what it can't do. However, I feel like we don't really talk much about how other languages do things, and I think that's really important because, first of all, C# does a lot of stuff behind walls, and it makes development much easier, and I think it's like it would be useful for everyone to know that that stuff exists, and also it's just generally good to know about what other languages are because you might need to use them in certain situations. So what is C# exactly? We kind of know, but to recap, it's a high-level object-oriented language, which means everything is objects and every method has to come from an object. It is statically typed compiled language, which means you have to compile it before you can run the program. This makes it like there's other languages where some of the stuff is done like it isn't compiled or it's only partially compiled, and a lot of it is done right before it's run, or while it's running. It's made to run on Dotnet Framework, and the Dotnet Framework is a massive library that Microsoft has made of objects and methods, and it just makes development time so much faster compared to other languages, seeing as you have a bunch of pre-built methods. And it's a hybrid of C and C++. What is its purpose? It was mainly used to make development easier, especially for Microsoft Windows applications. It's like before this, they were kind of like, this was made back in 2002 when it was released. And so there were other object-oriented programming languages, but they weren't completely dedicated for that. I'll get to those in a little bit. So this is the biggest completely one of the biggest completely dedicated languages for object-oriented programming, and that means it does a lot of things. It can use that to its full effectiveness. It's used for web, mobile, Windows, game development, because a lot of those stuff can benefit from object, and it also has a lot of quality of life improvements like automatic garbage collection, which is basically getting rid of, if I'm right, getting rid of variables and stuff like that after you're done using them. Like in other languages, I'll give an example once I get to it, but other languages, you have to manually delete variables from memory. C# does that automatically. Type protection, that just makes it prevent errors from happening while it's compiling, and just highly protective in general. So compared to other C languages, C, the first C language, as far as I remember, it's the lowest language I'm going to be talking about. It's much faster than C because it's lower level and doesn't have to deal with all the overhead. And if developers want to use it, then they generally use it because they want better control over how their application uses memory or processing and stuff like that. After C came C++, which is semi-object orientated. It was implemented to kind of use objects, but also if you want to use it as C, you can kind of do that as well. It's a hybrid of C, well, not hybrid of C and C#, but it's kind of the in-between of C and C#. This is used a lot on modern platforms because it just was used for a very long time before C# came, and can be used to build standalone applications. Oh, and here's an example of the like manual garbage collection here. Like you make a variable a, lowercase a here, and once you're done with it, you have to manually delete it there. Java, I actually started with Java, so Java is doesn't say that, but Java is also a object-oriented language, right? Pretty sure it is. And so it's very similar to C#. Both are semi-interpreted languages. Both have built-in garbage collection as well. And it will run on most operating systems. Some niche operating systems won't run it. You do need a Java runtime environment for them, but besides that, it'll run on basically everything. And it's somewhat less complex than C#. It doesn't have nearly as many pre-built methods and objects like that like what are in the .Net Framework, which can make it either simpler or less useful, depending on what you want to make. JavaScript is very widely used to make websites and programs on websites. It's not object-oriented, so it uses more traditional programming as far as I can tell. It's dynamically typed, which means that, oh gosh, if I remember correctly, it means like it's, oh gosh, I forgot what it was. Well, I do know it runs in browsers. Like you don't really need to compile it; it just runs in browsers. So, but it doesn't have error detection in it. So if you kind of have to run it to find the errors or bugs or stuff like that. And comparison to Python. We've all probably programmed in Python, and so we know what it's like. It's free and open source, while other languages are kind of developed by very certain companies. Dynamic interpreted language, which means that it's, well, it's not lax, but the compiler tries to, like if you put in a variable, you can just say var and type in, like say in decimal, and it'll just, like in decimal format, and it'll just assume it's a decimal. That can be good or not good, depending on what you want it to do. But it allows development time to be much faster, seen as you don't have to worry as much, you don't have to have as strict of a syntax as C#. But it does come at the cost of running slightly slower than C#. It's also, it's not nearly as controllable as C#, or at least it doesn't have all the pre-built functions and methods and objects of the .NET Framework. So that's something you need to keep in mind. So general advantages of C# has the .NET Framework, which is a really huge deal. It's really good. Has more in-depth tools like most programming languages. They have some sort of tool you can use. Visual Studio is really good compared to them, though. You can just optimize it how you like it and do so much with it. Specialized for object-oriented solutions. So if you're working with stuff that can be interpreted as objects, then it's really good at working with stuff like that. And it has a lot of quality of life features that you'll probably really appreciate when you don't have them, like automatic garbage collection and tide protection. But some disadvantages it might have is like you have to learn a lot of the constructions in the language in order to fully understand and use it to its full potential. It's not as fast as C, obviously, but there's a lot of other languages. It's rarely seen out of Windows applications. You can make it run out of Windows, like you can make it run without Windows applications, but it's pretty difficult. It's tailored for Windows applications and stuff like that. And its development is not as fast as simpler languages because there's just a lot you can do with it, and you just need to learn how to do it.
You have a point about the Windows applications. We saw how much work it takes to do mobile development with Xamarin.
Oh yeah. Oh, another thing, like I'd forgotten to say this, but like for example, this like Visual Studios, it's like an example of it being amazing is, you know, us doing window forms and stuff like that. Visual Studios does that automatically mostly. I've tried making forms on Java before. Now this was back when I was in high school, so I haven't done it in a while, but I remember it being much more awful than how I do it now. It just takes a lot more time. You can get it to be the same quality. It's just, you know, Visual Studios does a lot of that automatically. And anybody have any questions they want to ask me?
Good job. Kind of will take on, but while he's getting set up, XAML markup language that Seth shows you with the XAML is also used in Windows Presentation Foundation apps, which are about 2 chapters of our textbook that we haven't covered. That XAML setup is the same. It's kind of like the replacement for Windows Forms, so it's more dynamic, changing of size based on the device and things like that than Windows Forms and XAML Forms. And it's also the language that Java uses in its newer forms-based applications. So XAML is actually turning out to be something that's going kind of across the board for these forms-based applications. We'll see if it actually comes to fruition, that hopefully someday you guys will just use XAML to design interfaces, and it won't matter what platform you're going to be using. More dynamic.
Oh, I'm spoiling my presentation.
Yeah, that's so.
Okay, so I did my presentation over C# passwords. I'm going to show you the password application I made a few years back that unfortunately I actually use because I forget my password to literally everything. I think I signed into Facebook yesterday and I had to reset my password because I never remember it. And then I'm going to talk about password hashing, which if I recreated the application, I would use some sort of password hashing to make it a little more secure. So here's my application. I thought about bringing in my laptop and actually like running the application, but I thought this would do it justice. So pretty much what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type in the application like Facebook, put in my username, which would probably be the email. I don't need to put like the @ whatever email provider it is, the password. But before I do that, there's a hidden list box that you can't see. I'm going to open the file. Oops, go back one. The file is just going to be like this, pretty obviously saved all of my passwords. That's actually what it's called. And it's going to look something like that. It's just going to save all of my passwords in a list. So there's no type of protection at all. I didn't want to put any actual ones, but it's actually that clear cut. So anyway, how it actually works is I'm going to open the file. They're going to be that password file. And then when I open it, there's going to be a function that's going to load all of that information into that list box. So then when I type in my information and click add, it's going to add that item to the list box, go back, and when I save it, it's going to save all of those items again. Here's the code for when I open the file. You can see I'm going to clear the list box in case I'm using two different files. I mean, this is all pretty clear cut. I think we learned stream reader in C#1. Here's where I add everything to the list. I mean, I'm sure there's better ways you could go about this that would have more protection other than actually saving a variable for the password. That's something password hashing says not to do. And then here's where I resave the file. I've already talked about this one. This is how it's actually saved, the application itself, and then the password file that I'm actually opening. The most secure way I think you could do this would be to hide that password file, but you can just open it from anywhere. If you hid it like somewhere into your system files, I think that'd be better than just leaving it on your desktop for anyone to see. So yeah, that's why it sucks, is if you open that file, you've got all of my information. I try to keep everything I use in there because I forget it every time. I need to use one set password, but that's also a problem of its own. So what password hashing is, so a website that's going to use password hashing, when you create your account, it's going to take that password you create, it's going to hash that password, and then save the hash password to your username rather than saving your actual password. So your actual password will never be saved on a file like so. It would have your username and then have your hashed password. And then in more advanced cases, it'll have more information that I'll talk about in a second. But it's going to save your hash password. And then when you go to log in, it's going to take the password that you enter, compare that, it's going to hash it, and then compare that to the actual hash password it has saved for you. If they're the same, it'll let you in. If it's not, it's going to tell you incorrect username or password, not just incorrect password for more security reasons. So here's an example. You take just a simple input box, you're going to get this long hashed output. If you take a completely different input, like completely different amount of characters, you're going to get the same amount of characters in the hashed output. If you just change 2 letters in the input, don't touch the screen. You change just 2 letters on the input, and you're going to get a completely different hashed output, which is good for security reasons. I have 2 more examples here, just changing a couple letters. The same length output, but a completely different output. Here's another example of the same thing. You take the hash hello, you're going to get something like that. Change 1 letter, it's a completely different output. A completely different line to another completely different output. The same example here. And then this is hashed with salting, which I'm going to talk about now.
I have a question first.
Yes.
I'm noticing that all of the hashes have about 40 characters, I believe, regardless of how many characters the input has.
There's different hash functions. Like I'll talk about that as well. There is no reason to actually make your own hash function at this point. It's like advised not to. There's already hash functions made that work. You create your own, it probably won't work. They've done their research on it already. So this is just like one of the pre-made hash functions they're putting it into. There's other ones, like this is one.
I know, but the question I was trying to lead into is, for one, why 40 characters in particular? And why is it always 40 characters regardless of the length of the input string? Yeah.
Did he answer your question?
Well enough for the moment, yeah, thank you.
What did you say?
It's a nonlinear function, and not a one-to-one function. So that's why you cannot like go back from the output.
Okay, so just regular hashing, is this enough? The answer is no. You can use, I think it's in my next slide, right here, you can use this free website and you can take any of these hash passwords and in less than a second, it's gonna spit you back out what the input was. So the answer is no. It can very easily be cracked, but it's safe in the sense that if you have a password file on your desktop like I do, it's not going to have your actual passwords. So a couple different types of attacks. This is unrelated in the sense of actual hashing, but this is the reason you use hashing. So one of the types of attacks would be a dictionary attack. You're going to use a list of files or a list of words in a file of like the top 1,000 used passwords. I mean, you can use a list of anything that you want to try as the passwords, phrases, common passwords. I have an example of one in the next slide. And then there's a brute force attack, which you can see here. You're just going to try every possible combination of different characters. And this type of attack is going to use a lot more computer power. So here's a list of the top 1,000 passwords. I don't think they're in an accurate order. I looked at the top 10 most commonly used passwords of 2019 so far, and those were not accurate. But this is an example of a password list they're going to use on a dictionary attack. I pulled this list off of a GitHub repo. And this is another part of cracking passwords, a lookup table. So pretty much what it's going to do is it's going to pre-compute a bunch of these hashes and save it in a form of a data structure. This is useful, so if they're going to try to do thousands and thousands of hashes at once, it could be done in literally just a couple seconds. And here's the example here. I copied about 100 of these and clicked run, and it ran it instantly. So I'm curious how many you could do before it starts slowing you down. So here's actually the example from that website. I just took 4 of them, put them in there, and it tells you the type of hashing it does. So you were asking why was it 40 characters long? They were using this form of hashing, that's why it came out in that output. And here was the input for each of those 4. So then there's password hash salting. And this is more useful if 2 people have the same password. Their hash passwords are both going to come out the exact same. So what you're going to do is you're going to take their hash password. Before you hash it, you're going to add a random couple integers, or it depends, whatever you want, just a little bit to it. And then you're going to hash that. And that random bit's going to be different for every password. So if we have the same password, we're going to add a different random bit. So then when we hash it, they're going to be 2 different outputs. And I'll use this next slide to explain that a little better. So when you create your password, you're going to take your plain text password. You're going to use this random little bit that you add to it. You're going to hash that. And then when you save it, you're going to save that hashed output. And then you're going to save the random salt you added as well for that password. Because when you try to verify that login, you're going to need to use that stored salt, add that to the password that they type in, hash that. And if that hash password is the same as the hash password that is saved to that username, then they're in. Otherwise, the password they entered was wrong. So this is what I was talking about a minute ago, the warning. They're saying to use one of the pre-created hashing functions rather than trying to create your own. I thought about actually creating my own really fast and using it for this presentation. But after seeing this, I figured it's more complex than something small. So I just left it at that. And I think that's all. Any questions? None?
Interesting, thank you. If you remember, we talked just a little bit about hashing when we were talking about queues and some of our other data structures. So that was really good. You know, a lot of information. I'm going to try it. Do you think they have that warning out there for other reasons too? Like the fact that it's illegal to take a certain level of encryption? encryption algorithm outside of the country without
Probably.
FBI or
It's illegal to
CIA.
use, it's really weird, it's illegal to use certain prime numbers in your encryption algorithm.
Is it really like that?
It
Does
is.
it say
They
why?
just say, because it'll get to a point where it's almost impossible to hash it, like the government had to do it.
Yeah,
so-
see, the government has to be able, they want to be able to decrypt anything. And so if you create this encryption algorithm that they can't decrypt, then it's guarded inside it. That's why they have all the warnings and stuff out there.
Isn't that like a point actually? So you can't decrypt it.
It's a weird deal, isn't
If they
it?
want to.
Yet the government feels that they need to be able to.
Well, another reason why they don't want you to do your own is because eventually, if you mess it up, you don't test it enough. One flaw that you won't see, someone else can see, and then if you post that out, then you can make everyone can use it vulnerable from it because you didn't fully test it or didn't even know a certain issue existed. Because if they find your hashing algorithm, that's how they can redo it. So they already found the algorithm, they can just work a way to backwards and move the other way.
Yeah, it could lead to a flaw in another one that's heavily used, because as they look at that kind of technology, consider hostile flaws, ways to break it.
That's probably another reason they should not make your album. You should probably make one with flaws more likely than
Yeah, there's certain countries that you can't take encryption algorithms into, and that's just outside of the United States and things. So it gets into some really security areas more so than our other software development. So,
Yeah, encryption is a big enough deal that it's just about a field in its own right.
really it's going crazy. Do you need that hard drive?
I have mine.
You got it? Okay.
So I did my topic on Blazor. Blazor allows you to use C# to run in like a web format, so it's more client side. So it's used in place of JavaScript. So if a lot of people don't want to use JavaScript, they now it's been in development over the last year, pretty much heavily. But so it allows you to compile. In the beginning of the compile, when you're running, it allows you to use native C# in like a web development area. So I have a basic one. The link sends you to the Blazor. So basically it uses something called WebAssembly. So, because again, JavaScript had pretty much the monopoly in web development over even all the frameworks you would use like Angular and like React, all that. That's down to the grids, it's still JavaScript. So this pretty big change. And WebAssembly is what allows it. So pretty much why you'd want to use Blazor over any other thing is tons of people, especially from other generations, a lot of people know how to use C# already. They already know the code. You can reuse the code that you have already had. And then it also allows it to use the .NET Core behind everything else if you want to be able to do other stuff. And yes,
Is JavaScript compiled,
what do you mean?
or is it interpreted? If you push JavaScript to somebody's computer, can they see your code?
Yes.
If you push compiled C# to their computer, can they see your code?
No, I don't think so.
No, I just wanted to point that out, because that's a really important
could be.
difference.
She's saying that this could let it be a little more secure as well, because they can see the compiled code, but it's not going to be all that meaningful. It's harder for them to steal your work, basically.
I actually didn't even look on I was looking at it a little bit earlier on my inspect element on the thing I made. Some of the things you use, because you can use plain text and you don't even have to put it in like an H tag or anything or a P tag when you're typing it out in like Visual Studios, but it doesn't even put it in because how it compiles it, it doesn't even put it in a like a P tag or anything on it. So other things I've used, it'll even if you put plain text, it'll eventually, when it compiles, it'll throw it in like a P tag or an H tag or whatever. But you can still see that it's just that's what you type into it, which I think is weird. What allows Blazor to use this, it's a Razor core is what they call. So I think it compares a little bit to JavaScript, so it knows what to do,
Mhm.
but they use that core to be able to pretty much, they compare like what you type into it so it can run it in the beginning. And that's a little rundown of everything. And also use something called Mono. I didn't really look that much into it, but so, and then this is a little site. Some of it's the default whenever you make it. Little side notes, you do have to use Visual Studio 2019. I think you have to use Preview 2 because it uses the .NET Core 3, which is still pretty new. But they don't, I tried using it on Visual Studio 2017, it didn't like it. You can't use the new .NET Core stuff on it. It's weird. It lets you download it, but it won't let you use it, which I thought was weird because I had issues with that here. But this is the basic site. So you can use a counter. It's a basic counter. You click. You can have it like fetch data from anything. I created a little, I call it the dice game, but you just roll. And then I also linked to someone else built a Blazor. I didn't build this site, but someone built tic-tac-toe and stuff in it, all in C#. Which if you want to play it, you can play it. And
You're
then
just running this through, what is that, Firefox it looks like?
that was my Firefox. It's any web browser. That's just my default I use. So this is the actual, what it looks like in Visual Studios. When you first start it, you'll get a lot of this. I don't know what all of it does, but from what me messing around with it, like the www root, that's where you put like the images you want everything to use and like the CSS and stuff like that. In the data folder, it actually has 2 CS files for the weather forecast. So when it brings up, the one that brings up the fetch data that brought up, so it declined the class of the weather forecast, and then forecast service was the one all in C# that pretty much, I don't remember exactly where it pulls it because this is built into the template. But then you have your, and that's just the CS file. And then your pages, you see you have a CS HTML files and then your Razor files. The Razor, they're actually called components, which how to start it, you do the page and what you want the page to be called. And then you can put in all of your HTML you want and everything. But then for the @code, that's where you start. You have to put all your C# in there. It used to be @functions, but now it's @code. So if you look at if you go into it and look, if it says @functions, it's the same thing as @code. But so instead of the on click's different, you put the @ and everything. And to call the function, you literally put it to the exact function you have in the name. And then that's the dice game. It's pretty much, you can just do what it is, however you want in it. And then they also have a shared folder, so how it brings up the actual menu, you can define a layout. So if anyone who's taken web development, basically you have to copy and paste. If you want the same nav bar and everything, you copy it all over and over on every page. And this allows you can set it, define a main page, how you want it to look, and you can set it up. And then you can, in your nav menu, you can add everything you want in like the sidebar on the edge. And pretty much that's all I have to show. Is anyone any questions on using C# in the web development? Yes.
So do you know of any limitations we should know of?
One of the biggest things right now is actually sometimes runtime. It's not, Blazor is open source and it's like not, it's being worked on, but it's not like dedicated being worked on. So some of the issues it had is like, if you get really far into it and use a lot of different stuff, it can take a long time to compile at the beginning. And then deploying it is a little harder than others, is throwing like, because you have to have an actual server environment, because it can throw an issue with some web host that just wants you to throw in like HTML files and like JavaScript files. So you can have issues with hosting if you want to host it, and you can have issues with it taking forever to compile sometimes. Any other questions?
So this HTML, this was generated by the C# code you wrote.
You can, okay, so you can actually, you can use, I'll run it. You can run, so HTML, you can mix both. So in the place where you used JavaScript before, you can use C# to do it now, if this loads. But I'll show you the inspect source, because I haven't actually looked at it to see what it says, like whenever, because I've reloaded all the images dynamically, so You see here, and we'll do it in the fetch data. If you do,
Okay, so the HTML we were seeing was just that little hello world bit.
Yep.
And then Blazor generated all the rest of this HTML that we're looking at now that made the layout and such.
yes. So like in here,
Okay.
Blazor generated the tables and everything through it. See if I can pull it up, because it doesn't like you messing with it when it's running.
I wonder why.
You see here it has the table and everything, and you only see one table, but then all the other different ones, it'll do it for each. So then, I mean, you still have to put some of the HTML in it, but same like JavaScript, you can run like for each code and for loops to like add more of the same or like iterate through stuff. If I go here, but in here you don't see any of your code. I don't think there's any option to be able to show, like she was saying, like so you can look up most of the time you can see what JavaScript's running on the page, and it doesn't seem you can do it here. So I guess it can be used for extra layers of security. And
Especially if you're worried about people either stealing your code or potentially worse, hacking your code. You know, like, just to give an example, if you're, say, a game developer, you probably don't want your players looking at your code and figuring out how to exploit it.
Yeah.
Other questions? Great job. So many different things that you can do. Did you find one, Austin? Do you want to use one of these ones up here?
I looked at the Unity stuff for like 2 years since I looked at it.
Okay, yeah, that's what I would do. I haven't been there. We'll have Taylor's Monday this week. And we're ready to start our web development section. And so we have so many different things available to us. Colton showed us Blazor, which is like the newest and the latest and the greatest.
I think the latest change they made to it was like yesterday.
Was it? I mean, it is burning new. When they say it's bleeding edge, it's still dripping. Okay, I'm going to bring up an example here from this old text in our textbook. Let's take a look. I love it when your presentations do such a good job at introducing topics. Helps us all.
Is that all the presentations?
Yep, we still have Taylor on Monday, but that is us.
So what else will we do?
You missed some really good ones last time while you were just stuck in your traveling. We're going to look at our next stop and then see where we are. Okay, in your textbook, the C# Pro, this section here, part 7, is the Windows Presentation Foundation. This is a section that we won't be covering, but it is the section that talks about creating forms and interfaces using XAML. So we can use XAML for Windows-based applications, but if we use XAML, then these applications are more
transportable. We can run them on Linux machines and, you know, in web-based platforms, mobile platforms, and they're more dynamic. What's that word you guys use when you're doing web development, that the components resize based on the
I believe dynamic is
responsive? Yeah, so
responsive.
yeah, and responsive is really what we're talking about, because if you use XAML to generate your forms, they can be a lot more responsive. That's the word, because it's more of a web development word than our kind of word. So all of those chapters are out there. Your book has a lot more information than all of the pieces that we'll be covering in class. So I wanted you to know this whole section. And it was a really hard decision, and it probably will be every semester that C# 2 is taught, whether the emphasis should be on Windows Forms or whether we should switch to this WPF, the XAML type development. And we made the decision to keep focused on Windows Forms because it's something that's been used for so many years, as it's so ingrained in the marketplace, and you'll get opportunities to learn XAML. And if you know how Windows Forms work and your web development experience, moving to XAML is actually a pretty, not a super hard thing. So that's out there. If you're bored at some point and you would like to learn something to go through a little bit more information. Now, part 8 is ASP.NET, and that's kind of what we'll be looking at. And the way our textbook is formatted, we're actually going to skip ahead. And this last section that has .NET Core, we're going to be looking at chapter 33, ASP.NET Core Web Applications. So you see all these different chapters. There's a lot of different ways to develop web-based applications using C# and using Visual Studio. And you can tell Microsoft has been competing against these open source platforms for a lot of years. So they have a lot of ways to do it. Just like some of our other topics we've looked at, that can be kind of a confusing part. So if we look at ASP.NET Core Web Development, as you get into this chapter, you're going to see a lot of references back to earlier chapters. You should be able to ignore those because they get into this chapter and just give you examples of how to create a web app. So let's do it. Before we do so, I want to look at Canvas, because we hadn't really looked at it while you guys were presenting. We're getting to the end. So for this week, that shouldn't say chapter 15, let me fix it. I thought I got it. It sneaked past me. All right, so there are some videos. I'm going to click on that. We're going to be doing this kind of intro here in class, but you can refer back to the video if you like. In the videos then, the web application is going to be enhanced to use a web form and have controls added like radio buttons and a list box. And then in this video, the add validation and calendar, this is an important one because in this one, the form is going to be updated to automatically let somebody see an error message if data doesn't conform to the expectations. So all these videos are out here because we weren't going to have time to do all of this stuff in class. So we're a little bit of a flipped classroom here where you've got to watch those on your own to get the information. Now, to actually do the assignment, the regex assignment, you need to use regedit. And so here's a walkthrough for it. So you have some videos. Each of them are short. Each of them are short, so hopefully not too bad. So let's take a quick look at this basic web development. Open Visual Studio. And as Colton mentioned, to use the newest resources with Blazor, you need 2019 and the latest and greatest .NET Core. We're just going to go for it here with whatever version is installed on these machines, because we're just going to do a basic template app, not getting into the really nice Blazor stuff. Blazor gives us more capabilities. So on your file menu, on new, we've always been looking at projects. In older versions of Visual Studio, here at this point, you'll see an option to create a new website. They've merged that into the other features, so we should be able to just say new project. Now, I'm on Visual C#, but I'm going to click on Web. And we're going to pick this ASP.NET. Which one should we try? Let's see. We have the .NET Core and we have the .NET Framework. Let's try the .NET Framework one first and see what kind of things it does for us. I'm going to name this Web Application 1 .NET Framework. Now, it asks us what kind of things we want to be automatically placed into this project. I'm going to leave mine here at Web Forms, and it's going to create some examples for us. If I chose empty, it would just create an empty website for me to add stuff to. For now, let's try Web Forms. You can tell it's doing a few more things. I'm still thinking about it. I think. Okay, so I'm going to rearrange my screen just a little bit. My Solution Explorer is over here, and I want to take a look and see what kind of things were automatically created in this project. And if you notice, it has a lot of the same folders and things that Colton's Blazor app had, because being web-based, we're going to have a lot of the same type items. Before we get too much into the stuff that it's created for us, let's display our website. If you find your Run button, your normal execute button, notice it's been replaced. And now it says that it's going to use IIS Express, which is Internet Information Server, which is going to be our web server, and that's Microsoft's web server. And mine says it's going to display with Google Chrome. If you do that drop down, you can choose different web browsers, different emulators to use for you. I use Chrome, so I'm okay with that setting. So I'm going to go ahead and click Run. And this default web application that was created for me is going to run eventually. There it is. So this is the default one that it created for us, just with the template. So using the template, we got this like navigation bar, we got some headings and a button. So there's some sample code that you could look at if you wanted to for this website. Everything should work. Let's try home is this one. Should go to the About page. You can see it's got some template stuff for you to change. The contact page should have some template stuff that you can change. So it just has some sample web application things for you. So nice. So whenever you were using Visual Studio.NET, if you're working with a web application, when you run, it's going to go ahead and display the website that you're working on in whatever browser you like. Now, if I look at the stuff that's in the Solution Explorer, Let's take a look and see what we see here. Let's look at our web config. In mine, it's at the very bottom. So I want to look at it first. It's an XML file. And it just has basic information about my web application, the kinds of things that I'm going to use and all that great stuff. So that looks good. Not much going on there. Now, all of our pages that we create are going to be ASPX pages. So if you look up, you should see an ASPX page for each of the ones that we were able to go to based on our link. So let's see, we looked at that about page. Let's expand it. ASPX stands for Active Server Page. So that means that this is something that would run on a server, and it's going to process information and pass it to the client. So whenever we're looking at one of these ASPX pages, it has a code behind file. So our about page has a .cs file that goes along with it, and that's the code behind file. Let's take a look at it. If you double click on it to open it in the editor, you should see that it's a standard C# code file. It has a page load event method already created, and that would be code that would execute before this page displayed, just like our form load event procedure would execute right before a form displayed. So a lot of similarities with our C# code. And Colton said, so once we know C#, it makes it easier to develop this back end behind the scenes server stuff. Now, if I look at the designer, not much difference, huh? So we could look at those active server pages, code behind files, and they all just have the page load. Got everything that we need. In our app start folder, we have a couple of CS files to help the system know how to run things and how to move around. You guys have some content here that's Bootstrap and some CSS files that you know a lot more about than I do. Some font libraries, script folders, so we can still have some JavaScript if we want to within this application. Whatever we want to do, we can have. Everything looks good. Okay, so we've got code behind files. We see we have ASPX files, all of the great things we need. So let's create another app that's empty. This one has some great stuff for us to look at if we wanted to, but let's create an empty one. So I want to create a new project.
Another new project.
Yep, another new project. And before we create an empty one, I forgot, we want to create a .NET Core. So this is going to be Web Application 1 Core. Because I want to see what the difference is in this template that it generates for us. We are getting some different choices. Remember, .NET Core is more multi-platform capable. So we get some other choices that have to do with non-Windows platforms. I'm going to keep it at Web Application and click OK. Now, looking at this page here, it looks very much the same, but the organization is a little different. Now, all of our, we have some HTML files or CS HTML files that we didn't have before. Let's look at our about file, CS HTML. It still has a .cs code behind file, so I'm going to take a look at that. It's a little different, but again, very common standard C# code that we're used to. Get a little bit of an idea how things work. Okay, so .NET Core, a little different. Kind of a better organization, huh? Because it's like a newer way of doing it. All right, let's create one more new one. This time I'm going to go back to .NET Framework because that's what the example I have is, and I don't want to run into trouble. And I'm going to create a sample app. Let's call this sample, and we're going to create a little app to allow members to sign up for our computer club. So let's call this sample members. For this one, I want it to be empty because we want to create our stuff. I will go ahead and add folders for web forms. I don't want it to create any web forms for me, but I do want the folders in place. Have any of you messed with Docker? You should mess with Docker. Have you ever explored any virtual machines or experimented with virtual machines? A virtual machine lets you, bring up a Mac on your Windows machine. Well, maybe not legally, but you can. But Docker is like a next step. So Docker allows you to create a Docker container that says this container runs Windows, and on top of that it has Visual Studio 2019, and it also has SQL Server, and it has this other environment installed, and it has this other environment installed. And then when you bring up your Docker instance, all of that software will be available to you, so you can create a Docker instance that has all of your development tools with everything working, and then you don't have to worry about an update messing everything up or something like that. So you should explore Docker. I should too. But I'm going to click empty for now. I just saw that Docker stuff and I'm like, oh, it is such cool stuff. Okay, so I've got my empty web project here. And what I'd like to do is add a web page. It's going to be ours. So here we have our solution, and right under our solution we have our project. Notice our project icon is a little bit different because this is a web project. I want to add a page to our web project. So I'm going to right click and choose add. And I want a web form. We could add all of these other types of components, web components to our project, but let's do a web form for right now. Now our web form, let's call it what? I think we want to call it default or something important. Hang on. It used to come up and name it default. Let's leave it web form 1 and see if it runs for us. We might have some trouble. In the old example, they always named it default. We'll see. Okay, so here is our XAML code for our web form. Do you know how to code XAML? You guys could figure it out really fast. It wouldn't take you very long, but you don't have to, because down here at the bottom, you see these different choices. If you click design, it will show you like a form designer mode for your XAML code.
It looks suspiciously similar to HTML.
It does. So let's click design and let's just type something here. I want to just type. Let me see what I want to type. Oh, I know. We can type just like directly. So we were used to kind of typing. This is one of those things that I always mess up at the beginning of using Windows Forms, because I'm so used to using Windows Forms that it's nothing to me to drag a control to the form to use, whereas you guys that are coming from a web background are used to just typing things on the form and having it show up. So it's just kind of a different dynamic. And once you get used to it, it's no problem, but it can be confusing at first. We want this to be our computer club registration form. And now that I've got this title out here and I've just typed it in, I could select it, and I do have some formatting controls up here in my toolbar. So I'm going to go ahead and make this bold because I want it to be kind of a heading. This drop down where it says none is the format menu. So you know how when you're using Word, you have all those predefined formats you can apply to things like heading 1, heading 2. That's what this is, only it's a web development equivalent. So I want, let's see, what do we want here with our format menu? They want us to justify it as centered. See if you see that anywhere. We have our font size. I see the left alignment. There it is. Okay, so where I had to find it, I kind of dug. But in this formatting area, this drop down right here shows the left justify button. If you click the drop down there, you'll see the justify center. Now I'd like for my background to be a different color. So let's look at what kind of properties we have over here on the side. Right now, we're looking at the properties for our entire document. Notice where my cursor position is. If I moved my cursor into my computer club heading, notice how the properties window changes to be looking at that text. And it just has that word, that tag strong, because it doesn't have any other identification for this heading. We didn't give it a name or anything like that. But those are different parts of this web form. So when we're working with our properties can affect different parts. I'm going to click back in my document, or I could choose the drop down and choose document. Look down through the properties that you have for the document. You have a style, you have a style sheet theme, themes, titles, not a whole lot of properties, but a few. So I want to look at my style property. It's not giving me any options. So I'm going to use this drop down and change it to form. Now, when you look at the form, you're going to see a lot of different properties. Again, we're saying this is a web form. So we're kind of adding that Windows form capability on top of the HTML document. So we have additional properties. Now, as you look at the form properties, find your style property. Notice how it's different. Now that I'm looking at my style property for the form, when I click in it, I have the ellipsis to give me more options. So I'm going to click on that. Now I can change different style settings for this entire form. So let's go to our background. You can try exploring whatever you want to try, but I'm going to go to background and I'm going to change the background color. Let's see if they use this terrible, terrible green. I'll do it. Now we could put a picture back there if we wanted to, or anything like that. I'm going to go to my font then. And you can change your font family. I'll go to like Arial, and I'll change my font size. Because we're a website now, we have more of that adaptive capability. So we don't have specific font sizes like we do with our Windows forms. We have just generalized font sizes. So I'll say medium. And then you can change any of these other font settings that you like also.
A kind of silly question.
What's that?
It seems to me that there's no reason we couldn't go into the XAML file and just edit it like we would an HTML document.
For sure you can. You absolutely can.
Which is not to say that this isn't also a useful thing to be able to do. I'm
Right.
wanting to point out that distinction
Mhm.
there.
So let's do it. Let's click OK. Now, all I got was this part up here.
Lovely shade of green.
Isn't it awesome? So I'll leave my title there beautifully green. And I want to do one more thing with it. I want to change its style to be a heading. So I'm going to say it's a heading 1. And then all of that other formatting that we did doesn't matter too much. We can try it. Now I can just actually start typing things. So I want a first name, and I'm going to want the last name of the person that's filling out this form, and I'm going to want their email address. And all those things are great. Yeah, Social Security number. We'll save it. Don't worry, we'll hash it. Don't worry, it's fine. We'll hash it, right? We'll salt that hash. Okay, so like Seth said, we could go just straight to our source. Let's look at how our XAML source has changed with these things that we've put on our web form. If we click on source now, we'll see, yeah, we've got a little bit more. I have some paragraphs here with those prompts and our heading for our computer club. So for sure we can come in and do the XAML. And then we also have the option to look at it in a split view. So you can do a split screen, and then you can have your XAML code up here and your design, form design down here, so that you can be looking at your changes as you type it if you want to do it with XAML. Let's run this now that we've got a few things on our web form. I'll go ahead and try it. So now, Visual Studio started up a web server, an Internet Information Server on our local machine, hence the local host. So our local host is running the web server that's displaying this for us. So our ASPX file, our code behind file doesn't really have any code in it, but we have designed this web form enough to display this information. So let's add a little bit more to it. I'm going to go back to just the design view because I want to show you that we have a toolbar over here. So far we've just been typing things on our web form, but we could actually use the toolbar just like we do with our Windows forms. But look at your categories. We have our standard tools that we're used to using, but we also have some HTML controls, and I'd like to try those first. So go down and find your HTML controls, and in your HTML controls, let's put a text box beside each of these prompts. So let's see, we want to input text. So I'm going to grab that control and I'm going to put one here by my first name. Now, just like a regular website, it goes wankety. And you can move things around a little bit, but just like working with HTML, you can have some effects of things, I guess, is the way we could put it. Because we're going to let this be a dynamically displayed site, we need to make sure that we set our formatting to relative positioning. We don't want this text box to be in a certain column or certain row, because that would mess up our adaptive ability to work on any sort of platform. So let's find that format that I can't find. We want to set our position to relative. Let me know if you see it, because it's all moved around. Do you think they just made it the default? Now, as you're looking at those videos, you're going to run into some of this problem, because we are looking at different versions. So I'm going to assume that they've made it the default, and we'll see what happens. Now, I want this to be our first name. I'm going to grab another text input for our last name. And then I want one more for the email address. Now, if I go to this email prompt and press space a couple of times before I drop that text area in there, I'm gonna have a little more control over the spacing of that object. So you want to get yourself positioned to where you want to put this thing before you put it on your web form. Okay, so now that we have some text boxes, let's run it. Nice. So I'll put my name in and stuff. And then that's it. It doesn't do anything. So let's make it do something. We're going to put a submit button, and we're going to make it down here under all of this other stuff. So right here where I am, they actually say to tab a little bit, kind of get to the center. And then we want to find a button, but I think we want a regular button. Notice in our HTML section, we have an input button, another input button that looks a little bit different. We have some buttons, and we've been experimenting with these HTML form elements, but we don't want to use our button from our HTML set. Let's go up to our standard controls, and let's use a standard button. And we'll look at why here in just a second. Now my background finally went everywhere. Love how that works. And again, if you were using the XAML code and creating your own code, you'd have more control over that. Let's make our button say submit. I've got properties over here for my button because it's a standard button. So I'm going to make the text, bless you, say submit. And I'm going to double check this format menu. And align. Yep, they've just changed that, I think. All right, so now we have this awesome submit button. Let's put a picture under it. I'm going to press enter right after my submit button so that it opens up a little bit more space in my web form. And I want to go find a little teeny picture. Let's find one real quick. Don't do a lot of picture shopping, but I'd like a happy face image. It's what they're showing. So I'll go find some images and grab one. I can use my tools and make sure that it's labeled for reuse so I'm not violating anybody's copyright. I like this one. He's kind of maybe giant, but that's all right. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to right click, save image as, and I'm going to save it to my pictures folder. And now I want to add that to my form. So again, I'm going to tab over because I want him to kind of be under my submit button. And I could use a standard image. Could we use an HTML image? Let's check. Oh, there is one. Let's try it. So I'll use this HTML tool image. Now, my image properties, notice it's using more of the HTML tag than the image tags that we're used to in C#. I should be able to find my image. My image source, I'll click the ellipsis. Things are a little different, huh? So in our project folders, we could add a new one and add our images to it. So it's a little different, isn't it? So I'm going to click cancel. And I'm going to go to the project. Let's get this organized. I want to right click on my project and add a new folder. And I'll make it be images. And then I'm going to drag and drop my happy face picture into that images folder. Now, once I've got it in my images folder, it's part of our project. I can go back to my image source. And find it. Now mine is huge. I knew it would be. Try to resize that. He's giant. Getting there. And of course, I could just have resized it before I brought it into my application, which would be the better web designer type thing to do. Now, what I'd like to have happen is when I click the submit button, I would like to display a welcome message down under my picture. So I'm gonna open up some space down there. I'm gonna go find a standard label.
How'd you backspace backwards like that? Or like,
Shift tab.
thank you.
Is it doing it?
Yeah.
Now my label that I'm gonna put here, I wanna give it a name because I wanna refer to it in our code. so that we can put all of this person's name and information into that label after they click submit. So let's make our text start out saying welcome. And let's name that label LBL info. And I want to save everything. And we haven't added any code to our submit button, so it's not going to do anything yet. But let's look at what we have so far. If you look at your source code for your web form, you should see all the XAML code that, if you've had the web dev class, should look like really familiar to you. Seeing HTML code. Next, if we look over at our Solution Explorer, we should be able to find our ASPX file. Remember, our form is named webform1. So if we look at webform1.aspx and expand that, let's find our .cs file, our code behind. Right now, it doesn't have anything in it. Has that method, but that's all. So we could add some code to that. If we look at our web form, we can actually go to design mode and double click that button, just like a Windows form, and it'll create a click event for us for our button. So we're ready to add that code. But before we do that, let's look at our designer.cs file behind the scenes. This partial class is building our web form. And as we scroll through, see there's not really very much going on there. But if I look at our XAML file, let's see if we can find some things for our different text input fields. Under this div tag, we have all of our text stuff. So we have input, input, input text properties. It gave it an ID and a type. But remember, those were HTML type controls. Now, if you look at your button control, do we see it? Where's my button? My button is kind of hid past all of these non-blank spaces. But if I go find that, I could press enter on that and move it down to its own line. Here's my button. The important piece of code in our button is this run at command. It says run this at the server. So that means this code is going to be running at the server level. It's not going to run on the client side of the machine. Our HTML controls do not have that run at server. So they're only going to be available to us on the client side. So the run at server decides whether this data is going to make the round trip to the server and back. Now I'm going to stop there because that video is going to get into it a lot more. But I think that it was really important for us to get started with this together so that you could see how this version of Visual Studio is going to be just a little different than what's shown in the video, but it's nothing major. You should be able to find everything. And if you can't, just go on without it. If you go through those, the main thing that you want to get to is that the regular expressions video, because that's what your assignment is about. Okay. So, questions about this one? lots to learn while you had to do all of these. The assignment is actually pretty small. So if you get into it and you think I must be missing something, this seems kind of easy, you're not missing a thing. What you need to do this week is explore these web forms and explore regular expressions, and that assignment is going to give you an opportunity to do that. With the assignment and using regular expressions, you're going to validate like phone numbers and different kinds of data fields. You can find regular expressions online in half a second to do those validations. But if you do that, it's not going to help you understand regular expressions at all. So you need to try to figure out how that regular expression should be coded on your own, and then go look online, not the other way around. Okay, so make sure you try to figure it out, get that regular expression as close as you can, and then go look.
Will they be the same as the JavaScript regular expression?
I don't know.
I believe the syntax is a little bit different, maybe.
Yeah, I would say the regular expression part is probably very similar. So I think it's pretty
Syntax is
similar.
hard to work.
Mhm.
They make way more problems than they solve. I had 99 problems, so I used regexes, and now I have 100 problems.
There you go. They're a great thing. I know my son with his meteorology degree complained about him for weeks on end when he was doing Perl script. So it doesn't really matter what language you're getting into, they're going to be about the same. So get it done, enjoy it. It's all great new stuff. I think that you guys did a really good job with your presentations. Appreciate it. I love seeing new things, and I really liked our topics that were kind of new. Now, if you didn't have yours done, let us know if you want to do something Monday so that you can get some partial credit for it. We'd still love to hear from you because everybody has great things to offer and to add. So get out of here, stay warm, have a great weekend.